Hello Idle Hero fans, thank you for tuning in today, as I'm going to be doing a video that addresses why and how the Fortress faction seems so much stronger than the rest of the factions in the game. And that's probably not surprising to a lot of people, but to the degree that it has gotten, maybe a little confusing, specifically when it comes to like light and dark heroes, which are supposed to be kind of like the outliers in this game. They're both supposed to be stronger than the rest of the factions. And as individual heroes, sometimes they can be, but unfortunately right now it seems like Fortress just has a monopoly when it comes to the best heroes. And not only do they have the best heroes, but they have the best synergy. And that's kind of where we should start with this, and that is that the problem is that you have so much diversity within the Fortress faction. If you just go through some of the better heroes, you look at Iceblink, you look at Mickey, you look at Ormus, Emily, and Sigmund, and even to a lesser extent Flamestrike, they all can work very well together, where you have crowd control from something like Iceblink, you have an interesting dodge, tank, and damage from Mickey, you have heals from Ormus, you have a buff from Mickey that gives all sorts, attack, reduces your opponent's hit, and Sigmund just does a ton of damage. So for the most part, all of the assets that make a good team can be found in the Fortress faction alone. And that is the first kind of key as to why they're so strong. If you couldn't mix factions, everyone would run Fortress 100%. And the only reason they don't is because Forest has been tied with them in a lot of the auras. And that's the kind of second point, is that Forest has been slowly creeping up as the second best faction, and it's mostly because of Ormus or Rosa, sorry, and then Demon Hunter. Recently, Vesa has been added to that equation as well, and the healing thing has become a big issue, where her and Ormus working together is very, very difficult to kill, especially if you have Rosa on the team as well, debuffing the whole enemy team. So now when it comes to diversity, you have the best crowd controlling in the game, the best healing in the game, and the best buffs and debuffs. So the only thing you would really be missing is damage. And as far as damage goes, it's not like heroes like Iceblink and Sigmund really lack in damage. And that's where it kind of gets a bit finicky, because you actually don't even need to go any further than that. You can make a full Forest and Fortress team that will smash almost any other team in the game with the right artifacts and with the right setup and guild tech. But if you can't, say for example, if you can't get Sigmund, you can always resolve to use something like Azmodel. And I know it might seem like, oh, that's kind of ridiculous. Like, how could you use Azmodel to complement a team when he's much harder to get than something like Iceblink? And while that's kind of true, the devs kind of skewed it in a weird way, where over the past 4 or 5 months, it's actually been possible to obtain, I think, 3 to 4 Azmodel from all sorts of different events. The event that's currently going on now, you can get 120 Prophet Orb summons and you'll get an Azmodel. I know just before, like a month ago, there was one you could get in the altar shop, so you could exchange altar coins for an Azmodel. And then before that, there was one for a summon prize as well. And I'm pretty sure there's one more that I can't place my finger on. But that's basically 4 Azmodel that you could have gotten without even having to get any from the summons. So if you could just get 1 from your summons, you're in really good shape. And Azmodel is so high on damage. His damage is absolutely ridiculous. So the fact that they've made one of the light monsters that has a very insanely high damage output very easy to get, on top of the fact that Fortress already has a very high diversity and Forest can be paired with them, those 3 factions work insanely well together and are not that difficult to obtain. And that kind of brings me into the second point, is that along the lines of the way that Azmodel is easy to get through events, it's very, I guess there's very little risk involved in just using all of your Prophet Orbs in the Fortress faction. You're going to get fodder, and you're going to get materials to make 5 stars, which you can then use the Prophet branches to exchange. And because there's such a high ratio of Fortress heroes that are strong, the chances of getting a good one when you do a Prophet Orb exchange or a Prophet Branch exchange is pretty high. It's much higher than most factions. Because, for example, if you look at something like Abyss, which is the extreme example, there's really only 1 or 2 heroes you might want from this on like an extremely high level. If you're being competitive as possible, you maybe might want Scree, or you maybe might want Queen. Those 2 are pretty much the only ones that are going to kind of fulfill a very top tier. And even Queen is like, I don't really think she does, mostly because of the fact that she doesn't have the complementing heroes that Fortress, Forest, and Light do. And I think that's kind of what the devs are slowly trying to fix. As I mentioned in my last video, or in the video talking about Kameth and Corpse Demon, that these guys kind of round off a little bit of the issue, where now we actually have good Shadow heroes, because before this, Shadow had really kind of suffered, and I blame a lot of that on the guild tech upgrades, because it seemed like they were trying to fix some of that issue when they buffed Karma's speed before they changed the guild tech, because before they changed guild tech, with Karma's buff to her speed and the way that Priest speed buff worked in guild, you could actually get Karma as the second fastest unit in the game, which provided a very strong crowd control unit from the Shadow faction, which was very useful. But now that they've balanced out all of the guild tech speed bonuses, she's again fallen off. She's too slow to really get her abilities off successfully, and she's fallen to the wayside, which again kills Shadow's biggest threat. Now, since Corpse Demon and Kameth have come out, that may have changed, especially with Corpse Demon. The more you look into this second passive, I think the worse it gets as far as tankiness plus crowd control goes. If you're going to want a tank, it's probably going to be Corpse Demon. But fitting him into the current meta is very difficult. But I think that the devs are taking the right steps to kind of move away from that one-centric kind of meta. But that's kind of where I get a little bit worried, because it seems like the only answer they have, due to the way they set up this game when it comes to an overpowered meta, is to add another overpowered meta that's very RNG dependent. So you're looking at something like Corpse Demon that if things go right, you could freeze like 4 out of 6 of their heroes when they attack you, or you could freeze none of them. And that's a very polarizing difference. Like in a fight in PvP, if you're in Guild Wars, your team could win 3 or 4 fights in a row, or not 4, obviously 2 or 3 fights in a row, or you could win none based on simple things like crowd control. And I think that's kind of a detriment to the game. I wish there was a way they could balance that kind of stuff out. And that kind of leads to another problem when it comes to Fortress, is that Demon Hunter works with them. And Demon Hunter is the queen of RNG battles. With a 50% chance to silence and an energy artifact, it's so tedious to try and go up against this hero. Because normally, like I said in the Kameth video, where they try to balance out crowd control with low speed, Demon Hunter has high speed, and then if you give her an artifact, she's going to shoot first, she's going to silence people in the first turn, and then on third turn it's going to happen again, and repetitive. It's just so hard to deal with. So when you look at the fact that Shadow, Abyss, and the Dark faction are kind of incomplete, you'll see that really, like, especially when you look at the Dark faction, the Dark faction's counterpart to Asmodel is Das Moog, and while Das Moog does have a ton of damage, he's very high DPS, he doesn't quite hit as hard as Asmodel. And that's where you start to see things that are trading off, where even if Shadow and Abyss had exactly the same heroes that Fortress and Forest do, the evil faction or the Dark faction just isn't quite holding their own when it comes to that. Now, their crowd control unit is much better. Dark Arthendal is far better than anything the Light team has to offer when it comes to crowd control, but it just seems like unless you have an energy artifact, it's hard to really get her to work in your team right now. And if you do have an energy artifact, you're probably going to use it on either Ice Blink or Demon Hunter even more optimally. Now, if you have 2, that can be a different scenario. But again, it comes back to the fact that those units don't work well together. If you have an energy artifact and it's optimized on Demon Hunter, how can you really put Dark Arthendal on your team unless you're going to go with the Rainbow Aura? And the Rainbow Aura then forces you to have an Abyss hero and a Shadow hero. And up until this patch, when these 2 new heroes were introduced, those factions didn't really have anything to offer. Again, you could make the case for Scree, but I don't think people are sold on him yet. But he is strong. I think he's kind of a sleeper pick right now, and he's been this way since he was released. And it's kind of funny that people have been really tentative about him because they don't quite understand what he does. But turn 2 and turn 4 to 5 for him, depending on crowd control and stuff, is absolutely ridiculous for his damage. But as of right now, I think if I had to draw one point as an outlier, I think the biggest problem is, one, Asmodel was kind of easy to get for anyone who wanted to invest in a Light hero, which then, if you want an Aura, ties you into Forest and Fortress kind of nominally, because unless you're going to go for Rainbow, you're going to go for one of those. And then after that, you look at the healing power. I think the fact that Vesa exists and the fact that Ormus exists, those 2 are the best healers in the game, bar none. and they're on Fortress and Force, and that's a big thing right now. That is a big factor when you're making these teams that have, especially if you're going to complement them with the Bambi pet. That's just so much healing over time. It's hard to keep up with pure damage unless you're going to one-shot the whole enemy team. And the only hero that's really capable of that, ironically, is Azmodel. So it's kind of in this weird catch-22 where you can't really balance that out right now. However, if I was to say how they could fix this, as I mentioned in the last video I did, they need to make 2 new Abyss heroes that are both strong, both very similar to like Corpse Demon and Kameth Ward to Shadow Faction. And I think that the stronger one needs to be a healer. Now, it's kind of weird because healers in the Abyss faction doesn't seem natural because the theme doesn't really fit. But we do have Norma, which does that kind of role. She's kind of a healer. So maybe we need a new priest in the vein of Norma for the Abyss faction that you can use to complement the Evil and then the Shadow faction as well. And then you can make a balanced team around that. Because that's the biggest thing that these 3 factions are missing, is there's no healer, and that really is not great. They have decent damage. You look at Scree, Margaret, Queen, Kareem. These guys, they do a lot of damage. And then you look at crowd control. They actually now have crowd control with Corpse Demon and Kameth and Dark Arthandal as well. So really, the last thing that they're missing is a healer. So hopefully devs look at that and they'll make an Abyss healer very soon. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but I hope they do it right and it balances out the meta a little bit. But that's basically just my opinion on why Fortress is so strong right now, and it kind of ties into a lot of other factors, mostly the fact that they're tied to Forest and the Light faction. But let me know what you guys think. Is Fortress that strong? Maybe I'm overblowing this completely. I know if you look at the Arena, for example, in the private server, and even on official, for most of the older servers, they're pretty dominated by Fortress-oriented teams, so I don't think I'm really overblowing this too much. But let me know what you guys think, and as always, have a great day.